This morning, we get to hear from Dr. Bruce Boria, who is the senior pastor of Bethany Church in Greenland, New Hampshire. He got his Master's of Divinity from the Theological Seminary of the Reformed Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. And in 2000, he got his Doctor of Ministry from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary under the yes, you give it up for Gordon Conwell, under the mentorship of Dr. Haddon Robinson, who, if you don't know what that means, he's like an excellent preacher. Okay. Bruce has served congregations in New Jersey, New York, Portland, Oregon, and then came to New Hampshire in 2003. Under his leadership, Bethany became a multi-site church with locations in Greenland, Raymond, New Hampshire, and Kittery Point, Maine. He and his wife, Cindy, have been married for 41 years. And I know, seriously, that's like legitimately worth celebrating. And he has been blessed with 4 sons, 2 grandsons, and as of 2 days ago, a granddaughter, which is the first girl in 3 generations. So, right? Right? So, I mean, listen, she's got her work cut out for her, and I feel like she's very protected. But I have known Bruce for 20 years. He was the first pastor when I graduated from Gordon to give me a full-time ministry job. Now, you might question his sanity because I was 21 for 4 months, like fresh out of Gordon, and he was like, yeah, youth ministry, let's go. But what I can tell you over these past 20 years is that Bruce here and Bruce in the grocery store and Bruce after church and Bruce in church and Bruce, I'm just going to say it, running out of gas on the side of the road, it happens sometimes, is the same person in all of those spaces. So what you get to hear from him today is exactly who he is. He's a straight shooter. He doesn't pull punches. He's super fun to be around, and I have been blessed to know him for this long. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bruce Boria.
Yeah, this week has been a week of first granddaughter. I told my son, you should let me name her. And he said, really, Dad? I go, dude, like, this is 3rd generation until we finally get a little girl. So he said, all right, what are you going to name her? I said, how about Cha-Ching? And we'll give her a middle name of Visa, because I know I'm going to be spending a lot of money on this girl. So he said, why don't you just name her American Express? And I said, because I want her to leave home without it. All right. I am married 41 years, and this Thursday I'm taking my wife for 3 weeks to Italy. It's going to be awesome. You know, anyone who's ever lost anything knows how maddening the search for that something can be, right? No matter where you are, it's on the back of your mind. All day you're thinking about what it is that you lost. It tugs at your mind, and sometimes it even tugs at your heart if it really is something special for you. And I was thinking about that and recognizing that there really isn't this sense of rest until you find it. And when I was thinking about that thought, I remember an old movie called Homeward Bound. You guys remember that? Yeah. In that movie, it's about a family who lost their pets. 2 dogs, Jack and Shadow, and a little cat named Sassy. And miraculously, they can talk. So the whole movie is about their journey finding their owners. And so it ends in this big climatic scene, right? Very emotional. The dogs are, limping over the hill, and it comes over, and the kids are out there shooting baskets, and all of a sudden they turn around, and there's Jack coming down the hill. And everybody in the movie theater, they start cheering, and then little Sassy comes, and finally Shadow, the older dog, he comes, limping in, and everybody's home, everybody's happy. Well, my 4-year-old, Luke, who, by the way, is the one who's the father of this little baby, he was 4 at that time. And I remember distinctly, he was in that seat, and in the middle of the movie theater, he just stands up and goes, they're home, Dad. And I look at him, and I kind of hugged him close, and I said, don't even think about asking for a dog. But it's emotional, right? Like anybody that sees those kinds of movies, you get like kind of pulled in. Well, that thought then led me to this story that's found in Luke 15. And let me explain why. In this chapter, we're going to discover that there's a very diverse crowd. On the one hand, you have these tax collectors and sinners. And it seems that Jesus has been spending an inordinate amount of time with them, to the point where he's even had dinner in their homes. Something that the religious establishment, right, the leadership, they were looking a little sideways at Jesus. They're thinking, why are you doing that? They were irritated that he wouldn't, keep them at arm's distance. And so the story begins to open up where they begin to murmur against themselves. It says, what kind of man is this that he even eats with sinners? So that's the context here, this tension that is existing now over Jesus' behavior. And I'm thinking if your whole thrust for this series is meeting Jesus, God in the ordinary, well, here's a great example of that. Because what Jesus does, knowing what's on their hearts and minds, he begins to give them a couple of stories. And the first story is all about this shepherd who is taking care of his sheep, brings the 99 back, puts them in a safe place, and then goes out looking for this one lost lamb that's out there in the open country. He looks all over until he finally finds it. And when he finds it, it says that he winds up putting it on his shoulders. He comes home. And what's the first thing that he does? He calls his friend. Says, I want you to rejoice with me. I found my lost lamb. And then Jesus adds this. He says, I tell you the truth. He says, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Now, if you're studying your Bible, like, we're talking about sheep. We're talking about finding them and bringing them home. And all of a sudden, he throws this little line in there. And then there's this conjunction. It's the word or. It's comparisons, right? So now he's going to tell you another story. Only this story is about a woman who has 10 silver coins and loses one of them. Commentators will tell you that that's probably part of her dowry. It was very, that was money. She lost it. She winds up turning that house upside down. She looks all over for it. And eventually she finds it. And what does she do when she finds it? She calls all her friends. I want you to rejoice with me because I found my lost coin. And then again, Jesus says, in the same way, I tell you that there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So now we've been given two stories. At the core of these stories, we find people who lost something that they absolutely treasured. And when they found it, there was this unbridled kind of rejoicing over the fact that they found it. And what do? They tell everybody about it. But Jesus told two stories, and then he's going to tell you another story. Why is he going to tell you three stories? Because, see, in the storytelling, stories have a way of bringing down our defenses a little bit. You start telling people a story, they start leaning in a little bit, trying to listen with a little bit more intensity. And right now, there's a lot of tension because they don't like the way Jesus is behaving. They have issues with these sinners. They can't understand why Jesus doesn't. But there's another reason here because, see, those two stories, they're kind of setting up the third story. So all this talk about one sinner who repents is going to become pretty obvious here now in a moment, right? Let me refresh your memory with this story. It's about the prodigal son, but I hope by the time we finish, you guys will look at this a little bit differently. It says, Jesus continues, he says, there was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. And so he divided his property between them. And not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. That brother didn't realize what was coming, did he? He was living large. We're out there partying, baby, just living life until he wasn't. And now he's in need. And so he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here am I starving to death? I'll get out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' And so he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, filled with compassion for him, ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, probably like clearing his throat, goes, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But it doesn't appear like the father was paying any attention, because the text reads that the father said to the servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And so they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older brother's out in the field. He comes to the house. He hears music and dancing, and so he called to one of the servants, says, 'Hey, what's going on?' And they said, your brother has come. Your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother's not happy. He becomes angry. He refuses to go in. The father goes out and pleads with him. He answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you have never gave me even a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' The father said, 'My son, you're always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" Now, what do you make of the story? I hope you're listening to that story in the context of this tension that is existing between these tax collectors and sinners and these religious leaders, and how Jesus is reacting. Their issue is with Jesus because they think he should have the same attitude towards these tax collectors and sinners. They're irritated by his behavior. And now we have this story that reveals that for this younger son, there was a real disregard for his father, wasn't there? And the older son, it just seems like he's mad at life. He's not a happy camper. In fact, he has real issues with what his father is doing. You see, I think that the story is more about the father and about the gross misunderstanding that his sons have of him. Let me explain. Remember, we just finished speaking about the son recognizing his great need. It says he's starving to death. What do you think he looked like when he came home? Because he probably didn't come right away. He probably waited a long time before he finally got desperate enough to say, "You know what, I'm going to swallow this humble pie. I'm going back home. He could treat me like a servant. I don't care. I just want to go back home." But you notice in the text, he feels like he has to come up with his little speech. Somehow or another, he wants to, get on his father's good side. So this whole thing about, hey, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Yeah, all of that stuff. The father didn't even really pay attention. Because by that time, he saw him coming down the road, and the father ran and embraced him, right? But that young boy he wasn't certain whether or not he would be accepted. And the older brother's reaction was really unwarranted. He's over there looking at himself saying, look, I slaved for you all this time. It has nothing to do with the brother. It had everything to do with him. And then what he said is, you killed the fattened calf for him. He couldn't get his head around how the father could demonstrate such love that he would do that. Like, why are you going to waste this big meal on him? And if they misunderstood his love, they also misunderstood his compassion. Because as I already mentioned, the father goes out and embraces this kid, puts a robe on his finger, a ring on his finger, a robe on his back, right? And the older brother, if the Lord blesses one day you guys are going to get married, you'll have kids. Almost 2 years now, I lost my oldest boy. Kayak accident up in Central Oregon, one of the big lakes there called Diamond Lake. He was a character. He loved to go skiing, so he lived in Aspen, did coding, for a living, and he would take his little GoPro, and at 1 a.m. when they had fresh powder, he'd be flying down that mountain, and he would call me, and he'd be like, Dad, man, check this out. The problem is that Colorado is 3 hours behind me, right? So it's 4 a.m. my time. And I'm like, that's really nice, Jared. Call me again, I'm going to kill you. But now, whenever we have these family gatherings, I know where he is. He's experiencing the best life ever. I never wish him back. Why would I do that? All the anxiety of life, all the struggles, none of that is his worry anymore. I just got to learn how to deal with my grief. But here's the thing. Whenever my family is together now, all I have to do is look over at my wife, and I can see her. The kids are having a blast, right? Everybody's together. But I could see on her face that they're not all back. Somebody's missing. You see, that's the father. In the midst of all the commotion, the son that they thought was dead and lost, he's back. And that surge of joy just comes out because his father missed him. And then all of a sudden the father's looking around and everybody's dancing and the music is playing, the food is getting prepared. He's looking all around because he doesn't see his other son because somebody's missing. And then he goes out to plead with his son to come on in. See, that's another part of this story. Not just the unabashed love that the father has for his sons, but this compassion that drives him to make sure that they feel that. And let's talk about generosity. Remember in the beginning of the story, it says that the younger boy comes to the dad and says, I want my inheritance. When do you get your inheritance? Usually. When a person passes, right? So it's basically like this younger boy is saying to his father, I wish you were dead. I want my money now. And what does this text say? It says that the father divided his property between the two of them. In Jewish culture, the oldest boy, the firstborn son, what does he get? Twice as much. So when he says, you never give me anything, and the father replies to him, everything I have is yours, is because that's the truth. He already divided his property with both of those boys. He demonstrated his generosity to them both. One guy squandered all the money, and the other guy didn't want to give anything away. This is mine. That's really what he's saying. He's mad that the father took that calf that really was part of his stuff. So they completely misunderstood the love and compassion and generosity of their father. The father, on the other hand, what is he displaying? Is he not displaying pure joy? He found what his heart had been missing. His son, whose lifestyle had robbed him of life, is now alive. And he's back home. And then the father extends grace to that younger boy. The last words that that son said to his father were really harsh and self-centered. I want the money. Boy, that could just be seed that's planted in your life, and the next thing you know, the roots of bitterness are growing up. It could be a wedge that keeps people from talking to each other for a very long time. But not this father. And then this older brother, he can't get over the fact that this guy who squandered all your money with prostitutes is now, you're celebrating his return. He had no joy over his brother's return. He could care less. He probably didn't give a second thought the moment his brother left. You know, grace has a way of offending our sense of fairness, doesn't it? That older brother is basically saying, listen, I worked, I stayed, I contribute. Where's my party? And even though the father says, everything I have is yours, that doesn't seem to be enough for him because he doesn't want to go into him. Because the older brother doesn't see the younger brother with the same eyes. He doesn't feel the same way about him. There's no ache in his heart for his brother. Grace has a way of doing that, doesn't it? You love receiving grace, but it really is hard to give grace. I love what Dr. Nichols wrote. He says, sure, let the prodigal return, but to bread and water, not a fattened calf. Let him come back in sackcloth, not a new robe, wearing ashes, not a new ring. Let him come back in tears, not merriment, kneeling, not dancing. Has the party canceled the seriousness of sin and repentance? Yeah, sometimes it can feel like that, doesn't it? He's not getting what he deserves. But I thought that's what grace was all about. I thought grace was always about giving what we don't deserve. The main point of this story is that Jesus is displaying the love of the Father. What the Pharisees and teachers could not understand, and what the tax collectors and sinners were beginning to understand, that Jesus, now modeling the behavior of the Father, is filled with joy when people come home. And he's filled with compassion, and he even wants the older brother to rejoice in that. So it wasn't good that there was this tension that existed between these religious leaders and these reprobates. No. Jesus is there to say, you who are far off and you who are near, everybody is welcome. And it drove them crazy. But let me end with this. You could be in the company of the world, or you could be on your way home, tired, hungry, ready for a change. And the Father will always receive you. Because you see, if you haven't put this together, that little lamb that was lost out in the open world, that's the younger son. And the Father's not content until he goes out and seeks them. And yeah, that older brother, he's like that coin lost in the house. He's in the house, but he's lost. You could be lost in the world, you could be lost in a pew. Doesn't matter. But Jesus' presence now is calling his disciples to demonstrate this love and this compassion, this generosity, this unbridled joy and grace. You want to meet Jesus in the ordinary? Then begin with the extraordinary. Take a look at Jesus and model yourself after him. Take Jesus now into the world. Because you know what you'll find about this Jesus? It's like one preacher said. He says, hey, listen, there is no means of measure that can define his limitless love. There is no far-reaching telescope that can bring into visibility the coastline of his shoreless supply. There's no barrier that's going to ever hinder him from pouring out his blessings, because Jesus forgives and he forgets. He creates and he cleanses. He restores and he rebuilds. He heals and he helps. He reconciles and he redeems. He comforts and he carries. He loves and he lifts. Jesus is the God of the second chance, the fat chance, the slim chance, the no chance. Just give the world Jesus.